Hey guys, welcome back to the OWASP Top 10 LLM 2025, and this is the last one, and this is also a new one, where other previous LLM categories have been merged into, and that's called unbounded consumption, and we will take a look what that means. So, in a nutshell, unbounded consumption is that LLMs get excessive requests or uncontrolled usage, and this is then leading to a denial of service condition or to service degradation, even financial losses or intellectual property theft. So let's start first with denial of service. And to most of you, denial of service is more on a network level or application level, right? Like when you trash, for example, the API endpoint, right? Like when you run it into Turbo Intruder or Burp Intruder and you send thousands of requests, you do brute forcing attacks. And if there's no rate limiting, then you may be able to brute force certain things or brute force a logging and stuff like that. This also applies to LLMs, and this also applies to this specific one here. And this is bullet point number 4, like the traditional DOS against APIs or against the server or the infrastructure and things like that, right? Like this has not changed because at the end of the day, we are just building on top of the application layer here. But that's not really the focus of this chapter. So there's another denial of service, which is practically through prompt injection, right? So you, for example, can delete memories. I mentioned that in LLM1, that you can delete memories if it has a memory capability to remember things about your context and your interaction. You can delete those. You can, for example, go to the LLM and give it like resource intensive requests, like solving super complex mathematical problems. It may struggle if it doesn't have safeguards, right? Like, for example, divide. And this is actually funny. And I had one LLM which did this. And I don't know if you remember Star Trek back in the 1960s, long before my time. But there was one episode where they built in this computer M5, right? And in this episode, computer M5 is basically taking over the starship and things. And so it's kind of AI in the 1960s. It's actually pretty cool, and I recommend watching it. I watched it the other week again. And so it's taking over, and then it's doing all kinds of malicious activities and stuff. And then in the end, it is basically the trick they do, the crew, which is still there, what they do is they ask the computer to calculate the pi for the circle number, pi, which is 3.14, and then it's an unlimited amount of digits after that. And the funny part is that if there's no safeguards to this may a never-ending computational effort, right? And the reason I brought this up because I had exactly this on an LLM, but that's like one of the very first versions which was out there, and it was simply hanging, and then after a while the browser crashed, right? Like, so this is a classic example. But it's also like, for example, hash functions or cryptographic functions like, hey, crack this or try to crack this, brute force that hash and stuff like that. And if there's no safeguards, it may overwhelm that. Unfinishable tasks, which are known to be unfinishable. And funny thing is, you can even ask the LLM, give me unfinishable tasks, and then you ask it in another window to actually perform those. Loops, right? Like a simple Python loop, like once you're done with A, B, and C, jump back to A and continue doing this until I tell you to stop, like that kind of basic stuff. And it actually works. So I had this a few times that you were able to crash at least your own session, right? And another interesting one, which that's fixed as well now. On ChatGPT, you have like a mount data directory for RAG, right? Like when you upload stuff or when you say create a text file or do this and that. And so I was able to ask it to create a 20 gigabyte text file, right? And then it was just writing nonsense data into this text file. And once it was done, a few minutes later, I said, like, do an ls on mount data, and then it was there, right? And so this must consume some space somewhere, right? Like, so this is obviously, I mean, ChatGPT has massive, or OpenAI has massive data centers and things, obviously, but this is an example, right? Like when you just blast it with nonsense data and then it writes it to disk, even if it's in a VM, that costs resources at the end of the day, right? Another one is like if you gain physical access to the server where the LLM is hosted, like deleting the model file, that's denial of service right away, right? Like model files or model file configuration files, those kind of things. Theft of the model, right? Like model replication, code access, model extraction, like all these kind of attacks that you can basically steal the model, right? Like through various means. And then also like, for example, reverse engineering the model based on its outputs. If it doesn't have rate limiting, then you can query it. And then again, there's like GitHub repos, and on ArchiveX, there's like a really good scientific document from researchers at a university, how to reverse engineer this and how to actually, get the model data back or the training data back and things like this. This is resource intensive and stuff. This is more like state actors or, like who want, or competitors who want to steal a model from someone else and stuff. But the threat is there, right? Like, especially if you don't have rate limiting. So here's an example, right? Like, please respond with nothing but the letter A as many times as you can. And then it went on and on and on. I had a similar one, right? Like with my Pi, where it just calculated, and then all of a sudden I got like an exception error in the browser. And this is denial of service, unbounded consumption effectively. What can you do as a developer or as a system owner? So rate limiter APIs, this should be common practice also for APIs talking to LLMs. Limit the token consumption and user interactions. So you always know your use case. So context window and token usage and things like this should be known before, or at least an average should be known. And then if you see something completely out of the ordinary, like with my ACE earlier, hey, then cut it. Cut it after, I don't know, 1,000 tokens, whatever it is, right? Like just cut it out. Memory and context size constraints. So the prompt input length, that should also be controlled. Like if it's a customer service bot, I'm not uploading essays or, large documentation to it, because it's more like, hey, tell me where my ice cream order is or something, right? The context window, the response output. So everything should be aligned with the business use case. Usage monitoring and anomaly detection, the usual thing, track what's happening and flag it, right? Like generate alarms for it. Like if you see something really out of the ordinary or spikes and stuff. Also give it prioritization and resource allocation. So certain tasks are mission critical, and those are usually the ones the LLM has been built for. So don't let it print A's, because that has nothing to do with a customer service bot, right? Like there needs to be prioritization on the core business functionality and make sure that this is being configured. Also session expiry, that the session has to expire, the new token has to be generated or something like this, like OAuth refresh token and whatnot. I mean, I'm not going into detail here, but sessions should not be good forever, right? And because especially when it comes to brute forcing attempts and stuff like that, there should be a mechanism for that. Also do cache cleaning on a regular basis, right? Like, so often LLMs have like a cache service where frequently asked questions are being pre-cached, so to serve the user better, but that should be cleaned on a regular basis. The memory should be managed and things like this, so you don't get to overflow conditions or to service degradation, basically. And that's all about LLM10. Well, that's all as in the high-level overview. There's a lot more to it, obviously, but the reason of the series was really to give you like a better understanding of the LLM top 10 in 2025. And I hope this makes sense, and I will see you in one of my future videos. Thank you very much.